May everyone please go back to their seats once more because we will begin the next session, which will be another workshop. Okay. Once again, we will begin the next session, which is workshop 1B, strategizing inclusive infrastructure in cities, to be shared by our friends from Commute Initiatives Malaysia. Once again, I do hope you managed to fill yourselves up and recharge. It was a great meal, wasn't it? Because, yeah, indeed. This time we will be tackling inclusive design. We'll be talking about practical implementations of inclusive design on the streets, spearheaded by our amazing friends and co-hosts Commute Initiatives Malaysia, with Suyan Chong and Justin Lim sharing their tried and tested experiences. So let's not waste any more time. Please welcome them on stage.
Sorry, technical issues. All right, here we go. All right, thank you so much, technical team. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Suyan, and I'm from Commute Initiatives, and we are an organization based in Kuala Lumpur. I'm so sorry that you all get me for your afternoon sleepy after lunch sessions. So I shall hope to make this as non-sleepy as possible by talking very little. So today, the team wanted us to share a little bit about kind of how we implement our work in sustainable and inclusive city making. And the real question is like, how do you get things done underground, right? But before we go there, before we get to the how, I think I wanted to share a little bit of the why, perhaps, because whilst we're here all talking about sustainable and inclusive transit and ways to move around the city, we recognize that this is one of the many different challenges that many cities face. Cities are trying to address public health. They're trying to prevent road deaths and climate-related health issues. They're trying to be more resilient to climate change, and they're trying to make the cities friendlier for children, for elderly people, and also for people with disabilities, all in the name of trying to make our cities more inclusive. And at the same time, they're also thinking about how do we integrate active transport and micromobility into the city and larger public transport networks. And it seems like a lot. It seems like a lot of problems that our cities are trying to solve. And inclusivity is just one of it. But what we see at Commute Initiatives is that streets are one of the ways that we can try to address all of these issues, because at the end of the day, our cities are full of streets, and streets are the largest continuous networks of public space. So if we can start to address these issues here, we can try to bring them else to other parts of the cities. So yeah, this is what we do. We are Commute initiatives, and we really try to work on making streets safer and more sustainable by putting people first. And we work across four different strands, mainly focusing on schools, but also transit and commercial areas. How do we get from the train station and the bus stop to where we actually want to get to? And how do we bring that to a bigger scale? So we also look at networks and multimodal transport. Um, and we have worked across the Klang Valley in the past few years. And so this is kind of just a summary of, the things we've been up to in the past 2 to 3 years. And I think the question is like, how do you translate all of these different plans into practical realities on the ground? And I think this is what we wanted to maybe delve a little bit deeper into today. So we're going to share less about the projects themselves, but try to bring you in on the process a little bit more. So I think, when we're working on cities and on streets, what we have to recognize is that there are many different competing agendas. And so how we try to position ourselves is very important, which is why we try to work both top down and also bottom up. And so as a grassroots organization, of course, our roots started in the bottom up movements. Commute initiatives is started by a bunch of architects who all have the skills to make amazing speculative renderings and kind of people who know how to communicate this visually. And so I think a lot of where we started was actually just in making renderings of what our streets could look like. And this is kind of one of the examples. This is a very heavy, high traffic street, and it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 lanes, let's just say. And by looking at areas like these, we try to imagine how they can be better for moving people. And we think that kind of by creating images like these, they're very important to spark conversations, because then people really see the possibilities, what's possible, without going too much into the detail. And sometimes, we share that online, and sometimes it blows up a little bit. So we recently heard from the wind that the mayor watches this video and wants to do this, but obviously no promises. It's just like kind of the way conversations are shaped and the way they're blown by the wind is like, it's kind of beyond our control. But I think what's important is that starting from the ground up really helps us to start that conversation first. And once that conversation is started, then people might be more ready for us to bring these plans and visions to life. And so this is kind of another part of the process that we do quite a lot of, which is advocating for things at a grassroots community level. And I think it's very important to recognize that the work we do is impossible without all our supporters along the way. So this is a project that was trying to address the first and last mile to transit at Filio Damansara station. For those of you who are familiar with it, this is what that first last mile looks like next to the highway. And so, we kind of got together, and similar process, we kind of put these images together of what the street could look like, what that first last mile could look like. And, it was taken on by the media, who really highlighted this issue, and also worked with a fellow local politician of the area, YB Chong, for those of you who are familiar. So really trying to use the networks and the kind of collaborators we have in the area to move things forward, to translate these visions into actual plans on the ground. And so this is kind of what that first last mile looks like, with the support of the public, obviously through media, but also with the support of local decision makers. That's another way in which we actually manage to implement things on the ground. And I think that process is something that we're developing a lot more with other projects. So this is a project for safe cycling infrastructure in Subang Jaya. Similar process where we're kind of imagining what that street could look like if there was a safe cycle lane. And for this, we're working together with the local politician of the area as well, Michelle. and also the local council. This is with MB Subang Jaya, because at the end of the day, those are the people who are going to be there to implement it. And we really want to try and build local capacity. So I think, our approach of trying to work together with the stakeholders who are there is really important. And obviously, these high level stakeholders are on one end of the room, but on the other side, there's also the community, the people who live there. And so, a big part of the process is also trying to get their ideas and like to get buy-in and support, but also really understand the challenges the local community faces. And all of this is done even before anything starts to happen on the ground, before any approvals get done, because we feel like it's really important to bring people into the process if you're trying to create something for people, right? Yeah, and so at the same time, we also work with schools if it's a school project. And this is really trying to get children to imagine what school streets could look like, and trying to inspire the next generation to hopefully they can implement those things in the future. And actually, with that project, it's actually being hopefully being constructed sometime this year, but it's kind of follow a very similar process of it. It started with an image that the team made of a school site, and using that image to kind of spark conversations and to get to different rooms that would enable us to actually translate these visions into plans that will soon be constructed. Um, and so I think another way in which like projects happen on the ground is also by looking at examples, like what is possible. I think a lot of the times, when we're in this part of the world, we will look for examples in the West and we would say, oh, in France, they have all these school streets and they pedestrianize them. And you go to your local council and they're like, but we're not France. We can't do that. And so I think, by working very closely with the people who actually do implement transformative change in your country, that's kind of the way we've been able to move things forward. And so this is, a school site in Kuala Lumpur, and the city of Kuala Lumpur, DBKL, together with the support of some international partners, have managed to make the school street safer through tactical urbanism, and actually having projects like these that really demonstrate what's possible in your own context, then actually inspires other people to want to do the same, because they're like, hey, there's an example, we see that it can be done. And so examples like these are very important to kind of mobilize that change. So Danau Kota was kind of the first school street that was really transformative in this way, that was done by DBKL. And, the next one they're working on currently is Brickfields, which we might visit tomorrow at our site visit. And, then this has sparked a movement. There's a momentum in wanting to create safer school streets just because DBKL did one school street. And actually that momentum is starting to build right now. So because of this momentum that exists, there is also a push for school zones all across Malaysia to have a 30 kilometers per hour speed limit. But there are like 10,000 schools in Malaysia. And it's very difficult. How do we get all these 10,000 schools to be safer? And so whilst, there are policy changes that are happening in the background that, we're also supporting, at the same time, change needs to happen on the ground as well. And so with this, I think having the support from top down to really implement change and for change to happen quickly um, means that there needed to be a solution that will work for all these 10,000 streets across Malaysia. And so together with the help of, other partners, we developed a national toolkit for safe school zones that would apply to school zones, rural and urban, all across the country. And it's meant to be applicable so that city councils, regardless of their experience in the past, would be able to implement this without the technical support from Commute initiatives or any of our partners. And so really trying to mobilize that capacity to a much larger scale that is way beyond us, and actually, brings these visions we have of safe school streets to the ground level. Yeah, and so this is kind of the toolkit, after a lot of conversation with everyone who is involved, the different ministries. This is a toolkit that's actually free to download. So obviously this is very specific to the Malaysian context, but if you feel like it's useful in your other countries, feel free. I will leave this up here for a few more seconds. And all right. And so I think, there's a lot to unpack in this toolkit because obviously it's meant to build the capacity of local councils to implement things on the ground. But one thing to highlight is that it kind of focuses on three main elements. For every school street to have a raised pedestrian crossing, road narrowing, and also a median or pedestrian refuge island. And with all of these things, it would then support the larger policy change for 30 kilometers per hour school streets. But the process is not so linear. It doesn't just go from, okay, look at a toolkit design and then happen on the ground. Actually, there's a lot of work in between, and this is kind of what that process looks like. It means going to site, collecting data, talking to the schools, talking to the contractors who are implementing change on the ground. And sometimes it means making that change happen for yourself. If it means standing in the hot sun and putting some nails in the ground, that's what's got to be done. Then that's the way, we really mobilize change to happen quickly on the ground. And so these school streets are starting to pop up. We're kind of seeing this happening across the nation. And so this is one that's just recently completed, super fresh. This is in Putrajaya. And this is kind of what it looked like before. And this is what it looks like after with all of that implemented. And whilst the images are very powerful, they're very provoking, what's also important is the data that's being collected. So this is actually a photo from yesterday. This is how fresh it all is. And this is like, as important as these images are to show the impact, to inspire more people to implement that change, the data is also very important to really put tangible numbers into what this change actually is doing. And so we're currently actually also working, scaling this up to more sites. This is in Bangi and this one's in Suramban. So, hopefully by the end of the year, the government's plan is to have 14 safe school streets across the country just from this one toolkit. And I think, it's really transformative to see that change and how that as I shared, just small things that incrementally build up to now being a nationwide movement for safe school zones. So, it sounds like a lot, but I think there might be some questions in the room. So I guess I'm just going to end on this note on how, small things can become much larger movements. We just start small. So thank you. Okay, so I think now I'm going to take some questions, but I'm also going to invite my colleague Justin, who has worked on some of the other projects as well. So we will take your questions.
So yeah, any questions?
Oh, hi. Once again, I'm Joseph from the local government unit of Quezon City. So currently, actually, we have an initiative under my department to change our school zones. It's like the school zone redevelopment project. And it is very timely as well that I came across community initiatives about these endeavor. I just have some questions because, first of all, some of our schools are in national highways, right? In national highways, it's a bit tricky to change the speed or to implement like the at grade crossing that you guys placed. I saw it because the school that I'm referring to, it's a major thoroughfare for trucks, like big trucks. It's in an area called Payatas in our area. So I just wonder, how do you guys solve or improve the school zone in such a tricky situation where it's like a major or a national highway?
Okay. I guess so with the 30 kilometer an hour school zone policy, it's meant to apply across the country. Of course, we have school sites in Malaysia as well. That's right next to the highway. Um, we all have also with highway projects also it's probably falls under another agency rather than the local council
Yeah.
most of the time. Um, so there is one project that we provided support to JKR under the Ministry of Works. So it's just that for that one, the specifications, we had meetings and discussion with them to see where we can come to a middle ground. So we did still introduce race crossings and lane narrowing for the highway. And similarly, there are trucks and all that going on that road as well. But the specifications for the race crossing over there is not as high compared to the urban one. So it's the gradient and all that that's different, that still allows for that. But that's our first project at the national road. It didn't go all the way down to 30, but I guess over time, we hope to work and build more trust and do more case studies. But I think the sentiment is that the concern is that because it's on a highway, you introduce these speed calming measures, it would affect the function of the road. So that's the concern that is raised. However, it's we want to prioritize the life of the children at the schools, pedestrians in that area, because they with the school sites that we are working on, it's based on it's selected because of the data that there's a history of crash fatalities at that site. Anyways, it's about reframing and trying to remind, I guess, the implementing stakeholders that we're working with the importance of reducing the speeds to save lives. So in Malaysia, we have up to 6,500 deaths from road crashes every year, and that's almost like a constant number every year. So I guess there's more and more momentum, there's more and more discussion about of that being important and wanting to address that.
Sorry, just a follow-up question. It's just a short one, I promise.
Yeah.
Was it hard for you? Because I think you agree with me that there's a jurisdiction with the local council on like minor roads and the national government, a different entity for national roads. Was the communication a bit hard as well when it comes to implementing the changes that you guys did? Like, sorry, you mentioned a while ago that you spoke with a different council, right, for the national highway. Was it challenging to convince them that this is needed, something like that, or how did the conversation? Did it flow smoothly, or was there plenty of back and forth? Because I believe we're gonna be having same situation with me. That's why I'm
Of course,
very
yeah.
curious about it.
Of course, if it's something new and us also being new in the room, the trust building process is very important. Of course, at the start there was a lot of back and forth with working with engineers who's designed streets for a certain way for a very long time. But I guess it's the ministry is interested to solve this problem of speeds and also fatalities. It's just on the technical side. We just need to take time and to find a middle ground on like on the design that everyone can agree on. Even for the toolkit as well, we have national level stakeholders in the discussion, and we came to a middle ground on what's applicable for like rural roads also. So that toolkit applies for both rural and urban roads. So yeah, through these discussions, we developed a toolkit, and now we want to try implementing it on few sites in Malaysia.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's snowballing.
Thank you. So, my name is Termana. I'm from Bali. It's a really impressive project. Congratulations. But I would like to ask you whether you have different approach from different kind of school. In my imagination, that it's going to be different approach from like kindergarten, elementary school, senior high school, or other, because type of mobility among the students is going to be quite different. So that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I think thanks so much for the question. That's a really great one. I think definitely there's many different approaches that we take. You know, for example, with secondary schools, we see that more children are riding motorbikes to school. They can ride at 16. Whereas with primary schools, there's a lot of parents who want to walk them all the way up to the gate. So you have very different challenges at very different schools, and also depending on the site. Some areas are in very busy commercial areas. Sometimes they're at residential areas. But this toolkit is meant to be kind of generic enough that almost every school needs these things. Every school would need a safe place to cross. Every school would need safe speeds. And so they're almost like these are the non-negotiables. And for all the other things, it's obviously site dependent. And we trust that the local governments for each place would understand their areas to, you know, have the wisdom to implement these other necessity things that might be quite different for every site. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Riri. I'm also from Bali. I'm actually very interested with your approach in the school zone projects. I wanted to know more about the data collection and design visioning process. Was any caregiver or teachers are also involved in your project there? Because I believe that when it comes to children, they tend to talk uh, off topic when it comes to discussion sessions there, and I was wondering if there are any specific tools, maybe like a sticker set, or is there like a designing session that they use, I don't know, maybe with Legos, or they draw themselves to incorporate their visions on your designs. Maybe that's just a technical question. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. We do two engagements, one before the implementation and one after. Be So for before, we definitely are interested to know like how far the children live from the school. So getting an understanding if there's a potential for them to walk or cycle to school, or if they live very far away. What are their current mobility patterns to the school? So we have a Google form to get an understanding of that. Aside from that is also the perception of safety. We want to know if the children actually this form goes out to the parents. Does the parents feel that it's safe enough for the children to cross the street in front of the school or walk to school? Is something that we want to know, and it would justify the design of the project, why it's important to have this there. Aside from that, especially for new projects, if you're working with newer councils where we want to build trust with them, sometimes we have this, like you saw just now, the design session with the school. It's so the with that one, yes, you know, there are some Legos, there's some of our custom street design cutouts that that the children can cut out and paste on the street. So you have things like bike lanes, race crossings, even bus lanes as well. So these are some of the street elements that that the kids can put onto the map right in front of their school. So there's a map in front of their school where they can where they can introduce some of these road safety elements. With the bike lane, you can narrow streets. Aside from that, maybe road safety is not something, in terms of design, it's not something that's taught in school a lot. So I guess through our exercise, right, we are trying to introduce this conversation about road safety in terms of design of the street to them. And finally, after the project's implemented, we want to know if they like the street or not. So most of the time, with like a lot of our projects, most of the kids. So I think you're asking just now. So are the teachers and adults involved? Yes, depending on different sites, we have the parents, teachers, and also the children all involved, and they put stickers. We want to gauge if they feel happy with the project or unhappy. Do they like the previous design or new design more? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick question. When I saw some of your designs, right, it incorporated the bicycle lanes. In your opinion, do you think the bus lane is more important or the bicycle lane? One. The other thing is also, you know, a lot of kids nowadays, especially secondary school, right? They are riding bikes, like motorbikes, literally to school. That is also some of the causes for crashes and all. How can we, prevent this? Somehow incorporate in your school safety zone guideline or somehow. And also looking at your Taman Bahagia, I'm just talking to him. Maybe we can take it up later to somehow Prasarana to help you with the Taman C project for that school.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So first question is, are bike lanes or bus lanes more important? I think they're both important. They're both important to, I guess, as because I think our main goal is to provide more options. Now there's only one option that is like feasible to go around, which is by car. I think it depends on the feasibility of the project. You know, bus lanes is not something protected bus lanes is not something that's been implemented in Malaysia before, and we hope to start that conversation like now. But bicycle lanes is something that KL has already implemented a couple of bike lanes. Not necessarily fully protected. So we have a few case studies of like global best practice of how a protected bike lane can be designed. So we think that both are important, especially now that we are talking a lot about shifting towards sustainable transport. How do we reduce our carbon emissions? And I guess also thinking about different users, right? Some user may want to prefer using the bus, especially going long distances. Cycling is something that we are trying to encourage people to adopt, going around their neighborhood for short distances. I know at different countries there are people who cycle 20 kilometers to work, but at least for KL, at least for Malaysia, we are trying to start this conversation to take up cycling in short distances, because I think for bike commuting in the Klang Valley is not as common. Nonetheless, with the protected bike lane, we hope it will make it safer. Safer with the protected bus lane is also so that the bus doesn't have to share all the lanes, right, with the jam and everything. Sorry, what's the other question again? You can take that.
That's okay. Yeah. And your second question was about motorbikes, and that's very related to what Justin was saying about giving people more options. Right now, a lot of, growing up in the Klang Valley, I grew up at the intersection of the LDP and the NP. There's no way for me to get out of my house besides by car, right? And as a young person growing up in the city, you kind of feel trapped. And the motorbike is the thing that gives you mobility, it gives you freedom, it gives you agency to finally go and meet your friends, to go on a date or whatever you want to do, right? And unfortunately, right now, the motorbike is the only kind of feasible option if you don't, when you're at that age. And for a lot of parents, it's also finally I don't have to send my kids to school. They can get to school independently and safely. And I think safety is the important. What are the options that are safe? And so we also feel that by advocating for more sustainable forms of transport, whether it's protected bike lanes and protected bus lanes, most kids actually live within a 5-kilometer radius of their school. It's very easy to cycle 5 kilometers, but it's not easy when the streets are unsafe. And so we feel that this is kind of it's a conversation that is quite it kind of touches upon many different things. By advocating for protected bike lanes and infrastructure for people to go to places safely without the cars, it also means that hopefully that will be the option that people choose in the long term over motorbikes, which is not the safest, especially for a lot of children who are 16. So I think for a lot of people, micromobility is probably the stepping stone towards moving towards more sustainable forms of transport. So things like e-scooters, e-bikes, they get you to places in the same way a motorbike would or a car would, but in a much more accessible way. And so I think what we're trying to do here is to bring that conversation, but also make sure that the infrastructure is ready there for when people start to adopt it.
Okay, very fruitful session. I think that would be our last question for Commute Initiatives. Give a big hand of applause for them. Thank you, Suyan and Justin. Once again, we remind you that this event is live streamed on Transport for Jakarta's YouTube channel. So do let your colleagues, your friends, your family, everyone to tune in.